Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Oh, you're going to love it today. Our guest today is Tim Lupfer. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him before we dive in. He graduated first in his class at West Point, attended Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. He served in various combat-ready units in the U.S. and Germany and around the world. In 1990 and 91, he commanded a reinforced tank battalion in combat during Desert Storm. He also served as an assistant professor at West Point, where he taught military history. That's what he studied at Oxford, was history. After retiring from the Army in 1992, he entered business. He served as an executive at the R.H. Macy Company while the company emerged from bankruptcy, then became a management consultant, starting his consulting career at McKinsey. During his 20-plus year consulting career, Tim worked with several companies and organizations in organizational change, leadership, and ethics and compliance. He retired from Deloitte in 2011 and then continued doing individual consulting for the next several years. Now he's writing and he's speaking, and he recently published his first book on leadership. It's called Leadership Tough Love, Examining Leaders Through the Lens of Reality. So it is reality that is our lens today. Tim, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. It's great to be here.
It is my pleasure to be here. Now, longtime listeners will know for a long time, I've been asking this question. And after that introduction, people definitely want to know more about this. So the question is, tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you gave us I just gave everybody the big signposts, but say a little bit more about the journey, if you would.
Well, I've actually been looking at leadership all my life. One of the things that I would do at school, especially in high school, is I just assess teachers just on my own because I was trying to determine what makes a teacher effective. And basically what I found out just through observation, and it's something I used when I went on to teach myself, is that the best teachers were the ones, first of all, who were utterly in love with their subject and they could communicate that. And it wasn't about them, it was about them as a conveyance to get the knowledge across. And also I noticed the teachers who established their relationship with you, which was not buddy-buddy, but teacher to student, and basically that gave structure initially, I thought always started out better than the teacher who tried to be buddy-buddy, and then things would get a little bit out of hand, as the year went on, and then they'd have to try to recover, and that was always uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So, I've been doing that, and then of course I end up at West Point at the age of 17, and then go out into the Army. So leadership's been a big part of that, and then I ended up in business, which is a different culture than the military, but a lot of lessons I think still apply. And the reason that I wrote the book was I was back from a business trip and I was looking at a magazine, and it said, very prominent business magazine, and it said, here are the world's greatest leaders. And I leafed through the article and I said, wait a minute, these are people in top positions, but that doesn't mean they're the world's greatest leaders. And I actually knew the reputations of some of those people. I knew that wasn't the case. And then they also in this article had pop stars and sports stars. And I said, wait a minute, these people are very talented individuals, but that doesn't make them leaders. And so I said, I think we need to save the world from muddled thinking about leadership. And so that's when I went ahead and wrote the book.
And here we are. We are. So I'm curious, you shared some interesting observations about teachers. And of course, all of us have experience of being taught. And of course, many people listening here probably have been on the other side of that as a teacher one way or another. What's the connection between those things that you just said about the best teachers you observed and leaders? What's the connective tissue there?
Well, I think one of the main things is I feel that there are two tools that any leader, and of course a teacher is very definitely a leader for sure. There are two tools that leaders need to employ to affect their followers. And in the case of teachers, the followers are students. Mm-hmm. And those two tools are influence and authority. And first, let me say something briefly about influence. First of all, we try to influence each other all the time. Influence is the personal interaction that you have with people. Now, the thing is, influence by itself is not leadership. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. we try to influence each other all the time. You and I are influencing each other. I try to influence my wife. If somebody said to my wife, Tim is your leader, hey, she's a, tough cookie from New Jersey.
That ain't going to go very well. That
Oh
is
no,
not going to go very well.
not going to go well at all because
My house either, Tim.
So we try to influence each other all the time, and you certainly try to influence people as a leader, but then there's the other tool, and that's authority. Because authority is the power that the organization gives you as you occupy that position. And the thing is, I think for a lot of people, they think, oh, authority is a bad word. I don't think so at all. I think authority is part and parcel of being a leader. Yes, we've all known people who abuse authority, who use it as a big club instead of a rapier. It can be terribly misused, but it can also be used very effectively. And people need to know how to use that power that they're given by being in the position to affect followers, to make things work too. And I think that's the connection there with the teacher. What I was trying to say is all the good teachers I've known knew how to use authority. Like I say, they wouldn't browbeat you with it, but they'd invoke it when it was necessary. And that's true, Kevin, of every good leader I've ever observed. I have never seen a leader who, A, didn't have to use both tools, influence and authority, and the best know where and when each is appropriate.
Yeah, there you go. It's interesting that we started there, really, in part because, and I looked away. If you're watching me, and you may have noticed too, Tim, I looked away because, last week, if everything goes the way I hope it goes when these are released, last week's episode was with Deb Grunfeld, and we talked about power. And she also is an instructor at Stanford teaching a class on power. And I think for everyone who's listening to us, if you missed that episode, just go back and look, and hopefully everything will be copacetic and it'll be last week's, and you'll go take a listen, because I think you're going to find a great connection between what Tim just said and what Deb talked about last week. So I hope that you'll do that. Because I've read most of the book, I know that you've sort of answered this question, but not overtly, right? By what you said, you've really already answered it, but not overtly. So the question is, what is leadership from your perspective? Everyone seems to have a definition. What's yours?
My definition is that leadership is the role of affecting followers to achieve the organizational goals. And quite honestly, Kevin, that's a fairly standard definition. I don't think there's anything too radical about it. But I think the problem is, as we bandy about the word leadership, we kind of forget, and we need to go back to the basics, because like I'm pointing out, leadership is a role. In almost every case, there are some exceptions, of course, but in almost every case, people are given the position by the organization. Most of us, most of the time, are not going to be elected into a position of leadership. It does happen politically, as it should, and that's a very good thing that we have. But in most cases, you're assigned the role to be a leader. And
that doesn't mean you do it well, but you are at least assigned the.
No, absolutely. And there are a lot of times people are assigned the role of leader when A, they don't have the skill set to be a leader, or they don't want to be a leader. And the other thing is, leadership involves followers. Now that, I think, does narrow it a bit. And that's where I make a distinction between a specialist, which is somebody who devotes his or her energies to a given body of knowledge or process. And specialists are extraordinarily important. Think of research scientists, things like that. But I've known some of those people who didn't want to have anything to do with leading people. And you know what? That's okay. It's fine if people want to devote, their energies, specifically and individually to a body of knowledge. The problem is too many organizations make the mistake of thinking if somebody's a skilled specialist, that transfers into being a good leader. And it doesn't. They're different skill sets. I'm not saying they're necessarily mutually exclusive, but they are different skill sets. And then the third part of the definition is organizational goals. It's not about the leader, him or herself. It's the organizational goals. And that's where basically it's the idea of bringing people together to achieve something to the benefit of the group, not just the leader, him or herself.
Yeah, it's not just about the leader, but it's also not just about the follower. There are some people who say, well, my job as a leader is just to make the followers all reach their highest potential. And I love the word potential and talk about it all the time in the context of the organization, right?
Right.
So agree with that 100%. So bunch of things that you said there that we could go further with. But what I want to do instead is talk about the title of the book. You called it Leadership Tough Love. So why? Like, why is that the title? What's the importance of that to you?
Well, it was a title suggested to me by somebody, and I took it up because I said, yeah, I think that nails it. First of all, I use the word tough, not in a malevolent way, but in a way to say, look, here's reality. Let's not dance around it. Let's not be Pollyanna. Let's look at it in the way things actually are. And so that's the tough piece. But the purpose is to get better leaders, to have followers understand better what leaders need to do. And most of us, most of the time, have both roles, by the way, leader and a follower in any organizational structure.
Absolutely.
And so the purpose is, look, let's be honest about what leadership is. I see too many mistakes where people think just because somebody has influence, they're a leader. Not necessarily the case. And there are a lot of specialists out there who are great specialists, but they aren't necessarily leaders. So I'm saying, look, let's look at this way through the lens of reality. But the love piece is so that we can get cumulative improvement, which is the lifeblood of our civilization. For the past 500 years, Western civilization has, and believe me, there have been some, it's been up and down, but by and large, it has been a push for cumulative improvement.
Right.
And I think that's the real key. So tough love is really what it says. It's looking at it directly, but it's with the genuine view of love. Let's go forward together.
Awesome. So, I want to go, you mentioned specialist again. I want to go back to that for a second because I don't know everyone who's watching or listening, clearly. At least the good news is more than just my family and team listen to this, Tim. But here's the thing. So I don't know where all of you are exactly, but I do know this, that chances are if you're choosing to listen to a podcast about leadership, that you are interested in it, right? And you're wanting to get better at it. And you're probably in the role or aspiring to be in the role. And so the point that Tim made about not everyone aspires to being a leader, and that's okay, is super important. And for many of you watching or listening, you may not quite get that because that's not how you see it, right? Like, why wouldn't you want to? Why wouldn't you want to? In some places, and for some people, that's the only way we can, quote, get promoted. So there's a bunch of stuff that leads to that disconnect. And I just wanted to make the point to everyone who's listening here is that make sure that you look at the world broader than your worldview, because your worldview may be like, why wouldn't they want to be? Like, that's where we can have the chance to make a bigger difference and all those sorts of things, which are all true. But that doesn't mean everyone has to or wants to or needs to. Anything you want to add to that?
Well, I think it's a good point that you make, Kevin. And I think sometimes organizations make a mistake into thinking the only way to rise up, get better salary and the like is to be a leader in charge of people. And actually, they shouldn't do that because there should be gradations in terms of specialties because specialists are extraordinarily important. And that knowledge and the like that's built up over time should be rewarded. I think the best way to demonstrate that is to look at sports teams. And let's just take baseball, and I'm lamenting because I'm a baseball fan that I can't watch any baseball this month. But when you look at a baseball team, the highest paid people are not the manager. The highest paid people are the very skilled players. And what's very interesting in sports, and I think it's true not only of baseball, but just about every other sport, the best performer is not necessarily the best coach or manager.
In fact, it's rare, the number of great players who have become great coaches, right? There are some, We can
There are
think of a
some.
few,
Yeah.
but man, it's a short list, right?
Yeah.
And the list is
Yeah.
actually longer of those who were the other way around, tried,
Yeah.
couldn't, right? It's an
Yeah, I
excellent
mean,
point.
a lot of good coaches and managers, I think, are people who didn't have the super duper ability, which came almost naturally, and they probably had to study it more and learn more. But the real point I'm trying to make is the leadership piece compared to a specialty is a different skill set. Among other things, leaders have to be more of a generalist, particularly the higher up they go in the chain. And one of the temptations of a specialist is to always go back to the specialty that I've been brought up in and that I'm comfortable in. And quite honestly, and I hope people are listening, if you do become a leader in an organization, you've got to be a generalist and you've got to see all the different moving parts. And you're never going to be expert in all of them, but you've
Yeah.
got to understand them and see where they fit.
And if we keep the lens on, that's our specialty, we're gonna necessarily automatically have blind spots, right?
Right.
So one of the things that I kept thinking as I was in the book was, okay, there's a big difference between what everyone says and therefore believes to be true and what really is true. And one of the places that it struck me, and I think especially so, is in part maybe because of your historical perspective and your, the fact that you have a specialty in history. Everyone wants to say this, Tim, that and the world is changing faster now than ever. Like never has there been as much change as there is right now. I don't think you agree with that, do you? In fact, I know you don't. Say a little bit more about your perspective on that, which I think is right on. And it's kind of like this whole thing, like, oh my gosh, how could it not be more now than ever before? And we want to look at, so just talk about that for a minute, because I think it's a useful perspective and you might shatter a bit of a myth, or at least get people to think about this a little bit differently.
Well, here's the thing. What I did was I looked back at 4 generations. The generations that came, my great-grandfather, Arthur Lupfer, and then his son, my grandfather, Loren Lupfer, then my dad, David Lupfer, and then me. And I'm very fortunate, and I hope it continues, by the way, that we've had some pretty good longevity in my family. My great-grandfather was born in 1857 and died in 1957. But the point is, when you look at his life, he lived through the industrialization of the United States. And that event changed his life and the lives of people then more than anything, at least up to this point, has changed my life. My life has actually been very, very predictable, in terms of our culture and the things that I could predict and the like. Whereas my great-grandfather saw things go from horse-drawn farming to mechanization. He basically saw things go from, wind and animal power, which is what humans used for almost our entire existence. And then all of a sudden we had the steam engine and locomotives and things. I mean, these were huge changes. And oh, by the way, they changed people's lives in that period profoundly. It took 4 hours to do laundry by hand every day for a woman. Today, it takes about 15 minutes to push buttons and pour some detergent.
And hopefully fold and afterwards, but
right. Yeah, well, we still have to sit by the TV and fold the clothes. But
they couldn't even sit by the TV when they were doing the laundry.
That's right. I mean, heaven knows what they did. But the point is that really the lives before me, like my great-grandfather and my grandfather as well, they were changed much more profoundly with things going on than I have been. So I think we need to be careful. I mean, part of the problem is a lot of people who are the change mongers out there, and I will confess, a lot of consultants tend to overdo this as well, is they proclaim every adjustment as some sort of huge epical
cataclysmic
change. Yes. And the thing is, we spend most of the time adjusting or adapting. It's only rare where we have to transform, which is a much more significant change. So I just think we need to step back a bit and say, hey, wait a minute, let's not get overwhelmed. I mean, the analogy I use, Kevin, just real quick, is how people today on the media report the weather. You would think that it was, we were having the 10 plagues of ancient
Oh
Egypt
my
with
gosh.
Moses, the way that people report on the weather today. And it didn't used to be that way, by the way. When I was growing up, it wasn't this apocalyptic stuff. And I think we've got to, dial back the drama a bit. And we do have to look at history, and we have to put ourselves in the right context. Everything we do just because it's now isn't the greatest thing in the world and the most important thing in the world. Humans have been around a long time. So, let's dial it back a bit and take it a little more easy.
40 million people today will be impacted by this storm as it rages across the United States. Well, how much rain will they get? Quarter of an inch. Right?
Yep.
I mean, like, come on, right? I'm right with you, man. I'm right with you. Totally with you. Anyway, now, do we have some great things that allow us to predict and have a good sense that we ought to take shelter if there's a tornado that we didn't have when you and I were kids? Yep. Is that great? Yep. That doesn't make everything
right.
a cataclysmic challenge, right?
Right.
So you make another comment in the book that I'd love you to describe a little bit more. And you say that leadership isn't scalable, at least not generally speaking.
Right.
What do you mean by that?
Well, and this is true heresy.
Well, that's why I'm asking.
Right.
I don't want to ask the predictable stuff.
No, I know. And that's a good thing to do. What I invoke this concept called Dunbar's number. And Robin Dunbar, who's alive today, is a professor from Oxford. And he did a study where he looked at the, I believe it was the frontal cortal part of the brain. And he looked at primates, and he looked at the number of primates. And so we're talking about like monkeys and baboons and gorillas and stuff like that. And in other words, what's the group number? In other words, what's the number of individuals in a given grouping of these primates? And is there a relation to the size of the frontal cortex of the brain? And then he applied it to the biggest and smartest primate of all, that's us, the humans. And basically he found was that our brain allows us to have the largest set of relationships, but it's still limited. And it's limited to somewhere between 100 and 200 people. And basically what that means is that's the limit of the number of relationships that you can have with people and understand them and how they fit in and everything. In other words, when you go beyond that number, it is just numbers. And I found this out myself in the Army. When I commanded a company, it was 100 soldiers. I knew every soldier. It was all male in those days. Knew how they fit in, all that sort of thing. When I commanded a battalion, which was over 500 soldiers, I thought, I'll do the same thing I did as a captain. Couldn't do it. My brain, to be quite honest, couldn't handle it. And so how does this apply to leadership? The point is, when we lead, we're going to have the biggest impact on that immediate group of people with whom we have relationships. And I mean good, close relationships. Now, can we be in charge of more people and, big organizations? And can we talk to them on Zoom and all that? Yeah. But you know what? What really counts is the leadership you have in your immediate relationships, which is why, by the way, leaders in large organizations have to be very careful of their immediate group and how they lead them. You can get on Facebook or you can do this or you can be broadcast and you can send out emails, but it's your immediate group that really counts. And when you think about it, Kevin, when people quit a job, and it's not when they quit a job because they're looking for something different and better. When they quit the job because they hate the job, the biggest reason is their immediate boss. And that's why leadership counts in that direct, smaller group. And so basically what I'm saying is that's the group as a leader that you need to focus on, because also those are the people that are going to see you warts and all. You can fool a lot of people with media and all that sort of stuff and give a great speech, but it's your immediate group that's really going to know you. And that's also where character is going to come out. So that's what I mean by it's not scalable. And there's an important lesson there, because first of all, it means as a leader, you've got to focus on your immediate group. You can never dismiss that immediate group and think, I'm talking to thousands of people. Um, so that's very important. But the other thing is, what it means is we need good leaders at every level. That leadership is not just something that you pass down from the top. Uh, in other words, you're just a communicator. No, you interact with people, and this is why we need leaders that are very capable at every level.
Yep. So because I've got someone with me, I've had a couple of military generals on the show in the past, and I think I asked them both this question. I'm going to ask you this before we sort of move on, and that is, what is something about, so there are certainly some people that are listening that have a military background, and many of us, me included, that don't. So the question is, what about military leadership might surprise people that don't have that experience?
Well, there is a difference in culture between the military and other things like business or volunteer work and the like. And one of the differences is, I believe the military is much more direct. And this starts with basic training and things like that. Let's put it this way. People are not, the people who are training you are not that solicitous of your deep feelings.
It's not a lot of tough love, but there's a lot of tough, right?
There's a lot of tough, but in most cases, to be quite honest, it actually was tough love.
And I understand that. I was just trying to be.
No, and it's true, Kevin. There are people who abuse it, and then that's just tough. But most people, in my experience in the military, really did combine it because they were tough for a purpose, not just because they wanted to play tough. But the thing is, the military is very direct. The other thing is the hierarchy in the military and the decision-making authority is very, very obvious. People wear rank, you salute, you do all these things. And sometimes they look like silly gestures to an outsider, but what they really are is they reinforce who has the authority, who has the decision-making power. One of the interesting things I noticed in business was it was a hell of a lot more vague out there in terms of who's in charge. And there could be a lot more intricacies involved in terms of, who really has the power and authority,
right?
A lot more nuanced. And I think that's one reason why sometimes people from the military, and it took me a while to adjust, have to realize, hey, it's a hell of a lot more nuanced out there in the civilian world. Because first of all, the structures and things change a lot in the civilian world because businesses change, businesses have to be reorganized, new things happen. So there's a lot more flexibility. Let's remember, the Army I was in had roughly the same structure as the Roman legions 2,000 years ago. So
we don't need quite the same. There are some reasons for some of those differences, is your point.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what's something, I know that you're in a different stage in your career now, in your life now. So what do you do, Tim? What do you do for fun?
I'm sorry, say that last
What
part
do you
again?
do for fun?
Oh, I am married to my high school sweetheart. We've been married 45 years. And we do a lot of traveling. She retired as well, and I retired. And we've done a lot of traveling while we were still working. And of course, with Uncle Sam, we did a lot of traveling as well. But we've done a lot of traveling to different parts of the world that we hadn't seen before. And that's been great. Right now in April of 2020, it's on a hiatus.
I was going to say, not a lot at this very moment. Hopefully when this comes out, or when many of you are listening to this, we can do that again. Yeah. Let's hope we can do that, right?
And my wife and I try to stay active. We hike and kayak and bike and do all those good things. And we chase around our 7 grandchildren, which is a hell of a lot of fun. And it's even more fun to turn them back to their parents. That's even greater. And professionally, what I'm trying to do is, I just want to focus on leadership, and now I'm just trying to do speaking, which also is on hiatus right now.
Indeed it is.
About leadership, because I do think, particularly for people who want to develop, who are younger and want to develop as leaders, I think they need to hear the insights from somebody who's been around, and to get the grasp of reality, such things as tension. I think a lot of times young people, and I was the same way, I thought, oh, my wonderful personality will get people to cooperate. That lasts about 5 seconds. There's always tension in human relationships. And you've got to, anticipate it, and then you've got to learn to manage through it so it doesn't become dysfunctional. So there are a lot of lessons out there, and that's what I'd like to try to convey in this sort of last phase of my life.
Beautiful. Well, you've had the chance to do that here. I've got just a couple more questions for you.
Mhm.
So what are you reading these days?
Well, right now I'm reading a book called Ireland in the 20th Century by Tim Pat Coogan. And I'm reading it because we were going to make a trip to Ireland in April. That trip
Well, I was going to make a trip to Hungary
yeah,
in April. So that didn't
yeah.
happen either.
And so, but I'm still reading the books that I wanted to read about it. And it is fascinating, the whole history of Ireland and all the ins and outs and nuances. There's extreme and very tragic violence. There's also the cultural aspect with the literature and the theater and the like. It's just a fascinating story and a little scary too. It shows how things can get dysfunctional pretty quickly.
Well, thank you for that. And so where can people, Tim, point people to where you want to point them? How can they learn more about you, about how that you can help them, about the book, anything at all?
Well, thanks, Kevin. First of all, I want to emphasize the book because I think it will help people. And so, of course, turn to the good old USA, which is the United States of Amazon. The book is available on Amazon, and also I've got my author's page there. So that's the best thing. Also, I put up a new website which focuses on leadership and my speaking, and that is timothytlupfer.com. So it's just my name with my middle initial.com. So I just invite people to go there as well.
We'll have links to both of those things as well as
That's
to
great.
Ireland in the 20th Century book in the show notes and on the website. And so make sure you check those things out. So now my question for all of you who have been watching or listening to us is this. Now what? What are you going to do with this? Just listening might have been interesting. Hopefully it was interesting and engaging. But the point here is that you go do something. So what are you going to go do? What did you take from this that you can go act on as a leader or as an aspiring leader? What ideas did Tim share that would be useful to you? And so I have my list, but I just challenge you to think about what it is that you take from this that you can go take action on, because then this will have been really of value to you. So Tim, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure to have you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. This was great, and you're doing a lot of great things.
Well, thank you. And before I go, let me just tell all of you that you can join the conversation. You can have input into what we're doing with this podcast. You can suggest people that you'd like to have me have on the show. You can do all those things by joining one of our social media groups, either Facebook or LinkedIn. Take your pick. You can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do those things. And if you are enjoying what you're hearing, we hope you'd give us a recommendation as well. We love 5 stars, but we really love feedback regardless. So hope you'll do that. Hope you'll be back next week. Another episode right here next week, as always, on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.